The call for help. The war room of the Talvek Coalition Command fell silent as the holographic display flickered to life. Admiral Krevan of the Talvek species stood motionless, his 4 eyes fixed on the crimson markers spreading across the star map like a viral infection. Each marker represented another system consumed by the Vorish Dominion, an empire that had spent 3 centuries building the most feared armada the galaxy had ever witnessed. Krevan's chitinous plates shifted with a sound like grinding stone as he turned to face the assembled delegates. Representatives from 11 different species filled the chamber, each one bearing the weight of their civilization's survival on their shoulders. The Murati, with their crystalline bodies that refracted the room's dim light. The Salvine, massive quadrupeds whose tusks bore the ceremonial rings of their warrior caste. The small, swift Pixari, barely visible as they hovered near the ceiling. All of them had come together for one purpose, to stand against annihilation. The Vorish have taken the Hell-Ion cluster, Krevan announced, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into the common tongue. 42 inhabited worlds. 16 billion souls. Gone in 72 standard hours. A Murati delegate named Thessera stood, her body pulsing with agitated orange light. We knew they were powerful, Admiral. We did not know they were unstoppable. Our combined fleets number 8,000 vessels. Intelligence suggests the Vorish are bringing 12,000 to the frontier. 13,000, corrected Commander Volnus of the Salvine, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber. And that's just their forward assault group. They have reserve forces 3 times that size waiting in their core systems. The room erupted in overlapping voices, some calling for retreat, others demanding they fight anyway, a few suggesting desperate diplomatic overtures that everyone knew would be rejected. The Vorish didn't negotiate. They conquered. They enslaved. They erased. It was their way, and they had perfected it over hundreds of campaigns. Krevan raised one of his 6 limbs, calling for silence. There is one more option. One we have avoided discussing because of protocol, because of pride, and because of fear. Every eye, sensor, and optical organ in the room focused on him. We contact humanity. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Half the delegates recoiled. The Pixari delegate, Zinwei, dropped half a meter in altitude before catching herself. A Murati representative actually cracked, his crystalline form splintering slightly from shock. You cannot be serious, Thessera said, her light shifting to a pale, fearful blue. Admiral, you know the stories. Everyone knows the stories. I know the facts, Krevan replied evenly. 73 years ago, humanity emerged from their home system with slower-than-light colony ships and outdated weapons technology. They were behind every major species in the galaxy by at least 2 centuries. Within 50 years, they had fought and won 3 major conflicts against species far more advanced than themselves. By using horrific tactics, Volnus interjected. The Krelith incident alone. The Krelith invaded human colonies and began systematically exterminating civilian populations, Krevan cut him off. What humanity did in response was ruthless, yes. But it ended the war in 6 months instead of 6 years. Millions of lives were saved. Zinwei's voice chimed like wind through crystal. They broadcasted the destruction of the Krelith flagship across every communication channel in Krelith space. They made their entire species watch as their most powerful warship was torn apart piece by piece. That's not warfare, Admiral. That's psychological torture. And it worked, Krevan stated flatly. The Krelith surrendered before humanity had to invade a single one of their worlds. That is why we need them. Not because of their ships, not because of their weapons, but because they understand something we do not. They understand fear as a weapon. Thessara's light dimmed to a deep purple, the Murati color of profound concern. The humans have been isolationist for 2 decades, Admiral. They refuse to join the Galactic Council. They maintain minimal trade relationships. They patrol their borders with fleets that never sleep and weapon systems that violate half the conventions of civilized warfare. What makes you think they would help us? Krevan manipulated the holographic display, bringing up a new set of data streams. Because the Vorish Dominion's projected expansion path goes directly through human space. Within 5 standard years, assuming they maintain their current momentum, humanity will be next on their list. We can offer them something valuable, the opportunity to stop the Vorish now, on our territory, instead of later on theirs. The chamber fell quiet again, but this time it was the silence of calculation rather than shock. Every delegate was running the same mathematics in their heads, weighing the risk of inviting humanity into their conflict against the certainty of destruction without them. Finally, Volnus spoke. If we do this, if we actually send this message, we need to understand what we're inviting into our space. Humanity doesn't just fight wars, Admiral. They traumatize their enemies so completely that surrender becomes preferable to resistance. Are we prepared for what that means? Krevan's 4 eyes swept across the assembly one final time. On the holographic display behind him, another system turned red. The Vorish were getting closer. Are we prepared for extinction? He asked simply. No one answered. They didn't need to. Then I'm sending the message, Krevan said, turning toward the communication station. And may whatever gods each of you believe in have mercy on the Vorish. Because humanity won't. The silent arrival. The response from humanity came faster than anyone expected. 12 hours after Admiral Krevan transmitted the Coalition's desperate plea across the encrypted channels that connected to human space, a single message arrived. It contained no pleasantries, no diplomatic overtures, no conditions. Just 3 words and a set of coordinates. We are coming. Krevan stood on the observation deck of the Coalition flagship Steadfast Resolve, watching the staging area where 8,000 ships from 11 different species had gathered. It was the largest unified fleet in the Coalition's history, a tapestry of different hull designs, propulsion systems, and weapons technologies all attempting to work in concert. They had been drilling for 6 days straight, trying to coordinate tactical maneuvers between species that had never fought together before. The Vorish would arrive in 72 hours. The Coalition's war games suggested they would last perhaps 18 hours in direct combat. Admiral, we're receiving a priority signal, Commander Yalth, his Pixari communications officer, announced from her station. Her small form flickered with nervous energy. It's them. Krevan's plates shifted with anticipation. Put it through. The view screen activated, revealing a human woman in a dark uniform devoid of ceremonial decoration. Her hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes carried a weight that Krevan recognized instantly, the gaze of someone who had seen too much warfare and learned to wield it like a blade. Admiral Krevan, I am Commodore Elena Vasquez of the Terran Defense Fleet. We are 30 minutes from your position. Prepare to receive our tactical team. Commodore, we weren't expecting you for at least another 2 days, Krevan replied, caught off guard. And may I ask, how many ships are you bringing? Vasquez's expression didn't change. 47. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Krevan felt his respiratory systems constrict. 47 ships. Against the Vorish's 13,000. The humans had sent a token force, barely enough to cover a single sector. I see, Krevan managed, fighting to keep disappointment from his translator output. We appreciate any assistance, Commodore. Coordinates for docking are being transmitted now. We won't be docking, Admiral. We have work to do. Vasquez out. The screen went dark. Around the observation deck, Krevan's staff exchanged glances filled with dismay. Thessera, who had been present as the Murati military liaison, pulsed a sickly yellow color. 47 ships, she said quietly. We called for salvation and received a symbolic gesture. Before Krevan could respond, Yaltha's voice cut through the disappointed murmurs. Admiral, new contacts emerging from hyperspace at the designated coordinates. I'm counting, confirmed, 47 vessels. Their configuration is, by the ancestors. Krevan turned to the observation windows and felt something he rarely experienced, genuine awe. The human fleet materialized like predators emerging from darkness. Their ships were smaller than the Coalition's capital vessels, sleek and angular where most galactic designs favored curves and bulk. But there was something fundamentally different about them, something that made Krevan's combat instincts flare with warning. They moved in perfect unison, each vessel positioned with mathematical precision relative to the others. No wasted space, no gaps in their formation. It was like watching a single organism with 47 bodies. The Coalition fleet, for all its size, suddenly looked clumsy and disorganized by comparison. "They're not slowing down," Yalth observed, her voice climbing an octave. "They're passing through our formation at full speed." The human ships carved through the Coalition fleet like knives through water, their course taking them directly toward the border where the Vorish would emerge. Within minutes, they had passed beyond the Coalition's defensive perimeter and continued accelerating into what should have been empty space. "What are they doing?" Volnus demanded, having arrived on the bridge. "They're putting themselves 3 light hours ahead of our position. If the Vorish arrive early, those 47 ships will face the entire assault wave alone." Krevan's tactical display lit up with new data as the human ships began deploying something. Thousands of small objects scattered across a vast region of space, each one barely larger than a fighter craft. "Commodore Vasquez, what are those deployments?" Krevan asked over the open channel. "Listening posts, surveillance drones, and a few surprises," Vasquez replied. Her image reappeared on the view screen, but now she stood in what appeared to be a combat information center, surrounded by dozens of human officers working with quiet intensity. "Admiral, I need something from you." "Name it." "Every piece of intelligence you have on the Vorish. Their command structure, their ship classifications, their cultural practices, their victory celebrations, their morning rituals, everything." Thessera floated closer to the screen. "Commodore, with respect, how will cultural information help you in battle?" For the first time, Vasquez smiled. It was not a comforting expression. "Because we're not going to fight them, Representative. We're going to break them." Over the next 48 hours, the human fleet engaged in behavior that baffled every military analyst in the Coalition. They didn't reinforce defensive positions. They didn't coordinate tactical drills with the Coalition forces. Instead, they seemed to simply wait. Their ships maintained their forward position, engines idling, weapon systems on standby. The only activity was a constant stream of encrypted communications between the human vessels and occasional adjustments to the thousands of devices they had scattered across the approach vector. "They're doing nothing," Volnus growled in frustration. "The Vorish arrive in 6 hours and humanity's great fleet is playing games with sensor buoys." But Krevan was beginning to understand. He had spent the last 2 days reviewing everything humanity had transmitted to the Coalition's intelligence computers, detailed analyses of Vorish psychology, command hierarchies, and historical patterns. The humans weren't preparing for a battle. They were preparing a performance. "Commodore," Krevan said over the private channel he'd established with Vasquez, "you're not here to fight alongside us, are you?" Vasquez turned from her tactical display, and in her eyes, Krevan saw something that made his combat instincts scream. Not madness, not cruelty, but an absolute certainty that made those things seem almost gentle by comparison. "Admiral, by the time the Vorish actually see us, the war will already be over. They just won't know it yet." The countdown continued. The Coalition fleet positioned itself for a desperate last stand. And 3 light hours ahead, 47 human ships waited in the darkness like traps ready to spring. The Vorish were coming. But for the first time, Krevan wondered if perhaps they should have stayed home. The collapse. The Vorish Dominion fleet arrived exactly on schedule, 13,000 warships tearing through the fabric of space with the confidence of an empire that had never known defeat. Their vessels were massive constructs of dark metal and aggressive geometry, each one a monument to conquest. The largest among them, the dreadnought Infinite Sovereignty, stretched over 4 kilometers in length and carried enough firepower to sterilize a planet's surface in hours. On the bridge of that mighty vessel, Supreme Commander Thrace stood before his command throne, his 6 arms folded in satisfaction. The Vorish were an imposing species, 3 meters tall, heavily muscled, with exoskeletons that had evolved for dominance. Thrace himself bore the scars of 40 successful campaigns, each one etched into his carapace as a mark of honor. "Scan results, Tactical Officer," Thrace commanded, his voice resonating through the bridge like distant thunder. "Confirmed, Supreme Commander. Coalition fleet detected at predicted coordinates. 8,000 vessels, multiple species configurations. Defensive formation suggests they intend to make a stand." The tactical officer paused, mandibles clicking with confusion. "There is an anomaly, Commander. 47 unknown vessels positioned 3 light hours ahead of the coalition formation. They match no database configurations." Thrace's eyes narrowed. "Reinforcements?" "Unknown, Commander. They are small. Insignificant compared to our line vessels. Total combined mass less than a single destroyer group." A ripple of amusement passed through the Vorish command staff. Thrace felt it too, the familiar contempt for species that thought numbers could compensate for weakness. "Ignore them," Thrace decided. "Advance the fleet. We will crush the coalition first, then deal with whatever desperate allies they manage to summon." The Vorish armada began its methodical advance, formations tightening into the crushing waves that had broken countless defensive lines before. But as they passed through the region where the human ships waited, something changed. Every communication system on every Vorish ship suddenly activated simultaneously. The transmission that flooded through was not a message. It was a recording, and it began with a sound that every Vorish recognized instantly, the death keen of their species, the ululating cry that their people made when witnessing something sacred being destroyed. Then came the images. The Eternal Judgment, flagship of the Vorish Third Fleet, lost 12 years ago in the campaign against the Korvax. The entire Dominion believed it had been destroyed in honorable combat, that its crew had died as warriors. But the recording showed something different. It showed the ship crippled and helpless, its crew abandoning vessel in escape pods, the grand warship left as a derelict. There had been no final stand. No glorious death. Just retreat and survival. "Cut that transmission." Thrace roared, but his communications officer was frantically working controls that no longer responded. The recording continued. Another, glorious victory, revealed as a Pyrrhic bloodbath where the Vorish had lost 3 ships for every enemy vessel destroyed. Then another battle, this one showing Vorish ground forces retreating in disorder from a species the Dominion had claimed to have conquered absolutely. "Who is transmitting this?" Thrace demanded. "Find the source." "It's everywhere, Commander," his sensor officer replied, voice cracking with stress. "The transmission is coming from thousands of points simultaneously. It's being broadcast on every frequency, every channel. The entire fleet is receiving it. The entire Dominion is receiving it." That last detail hit Thrace like a physical blow. This wasn't just being sent to his fleet. It was being transmitted back home, to every world in Vorish space, to every citizen who had been raised on stories of invincible military might. The recording shifted again, and this time Thrace recognized the location immediately, the Hell-Ion cluster, conquered just days ago. But the recording showed footage from inside Vorish ships during the battle. It showed crew members panicking. It showed commanders making desperate decisions. It showed the chaos and fear that official reports had sanitized into tales of orderly conquest. Most damning of all, it showed the casualties. The real casualties. Thousands of Vorish warriors dead in a campaign that had been reported as nearly bloodless. "How do they have this footage?" Thrace whispered. "These are internal recordings. Secured systems." His intelligence officer looked up from his station, and Thrace saw something he had never seen in a Vorish warrior's eyes before, genuine fear. Commander, we're detecting massive data breaches across the entire fleet. They're inside our systems. They've been inside our systems. Every battle we've fought for the past decade, every transmission we've made, they have all of it. A new voice cut through the chaos, speaking in perfect Voorish high speech, Supreme Commander Thrace. This is Commodore Elena Vasquez of the Terran Defense Fleet. We need to talk. On his view screen, the human appeared. She looked small, fragile, nothing like the warrior species that dominated the galaxy. But there was something in her eyes that made Thrace's instincts scream warnings his pride refused to hear. You are broadcasting lies, Thrace said, forcing authority into his voice. Propaganda designed to. These are your own recordings, Commander. From your own ships, your own systems. We didn't fabricate anything. We just showed the truth your government has been hiding. Vasquez leaned forward slightly. Right now, every citizen in the Voorish Dominion is seeing what war actually costs. They're seeing that you're not invincible. They're seeing that their government has been lying to them for decades. You think this changes anything? Thrace snarled. We still have 13,000 ships. You have 47. This is psychological warfare from a desperate position. You're right, Vasquez agreed calmly. This is psychological warfare. And it's already over. New alerts flashed across Thrace's displays. Riots on the Voorish homeworld. Government buildings under siege. Military commanders from across the Dominion demanding explanations. Reserve fleets refusing to deploy until questions were answered. The carefully constructed narrative of Voorish supremacy was collapsing in real time. Your fleet, Vasquez continued, has two options. You can advance against the coalition and spend the next 6 hours in bloody combat while your entire civilization tears itself apart back home. You'll win, probably, but you'll return to an empire in civil war, your casualties will be broadcast across every channel, and the Dominion will fracture. Or. Thrace found himself asking, even though he knew he'd already lost. Or you order a strategic withdrawal. You tell your people you're returning to stabilize the situation at home. You preserve your fleet, your warriors live to see their families again, and you give your government a chance to survive what we've just done to it. Thrace looked at his tactical display. 13,000 ships. More than enough to crush the coalition. More than enough to swat aside 47 human vessels. But Vasquez was right, victory here meant destruction at home. If we withdraw, Thrace said slowly, what guarantee do we have that you won't release more information? None, Vasquez said bluntly. Because we have everything, Commander. Every secret, every hidden casualty report, every manipulated victory assessment. We've had it for months. If you attack, we release all of it. If you withdraw and honor the ceasefire, we hold it in reserve. The choice is yours. Thrace stood motionless for a long moment, awareness washing over him that he had been outmaneuvered so completely he'd never even seen the battlefield. The humans hadn't come to fight. They'd come to make fighting impossible. Signal the fleet, he finally said, each word like poison. All vessels withdraw to Dominion space. Maximum speed. As the Voorish armada began its retreat, Krevan watched from the steadfast resolve in stunned silence. Around him, the coalition command staff stared at their displays in disbelief. They're leaving, Thessera said, her crystalline body flickering through colors that had no names. All of them. They're just, leaving. Volnus made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a roar. 47 ships. 47 human ships just made 13,000 Voorish vessels turn around and run without firing a shot. Volnus made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a roar. 47 ships. 47 human ships just made 13,000 Voorish vessels turn around and run without firing a shot. Krevan opened a channel to Vasquez. Commodore, on behalf of the Talvek coalition, I must ask, how? Vasquez allowed herself a small, tired smile. We studied them, Admiral. We learned what they feared most wasn't death in battle, it was their own people learning the truth about how many had died for lies. We didn't need to destroy their fleet. We just needed to destroy their narrative. You've been preparing this for months, Krevan realized. We've been preparing for the Vorish for years, Vasquez corrected. We knew they'd reach our borders eventually. When you called for help, we saw an opportunity to end them as a threat before they became our problem. The coalition was never the target, Admiral. The Vorish government was. Krevan watched the retreat continue, understanding settling over him like a heavy cloak. Humanity hadn't sent 47 ships because that's all they could spare. They'd sent 47 ships because that's all they needed. The stories about your species, Krevan said quietly. They don't do you justice. You're not just warriors. You're architects of fear. No, Admiral, Vasquez replied, her expression hardening. We're survivors. And we learned a long time ago that the best way to survive is to make sure your enemies are too busy collapsing from within to ever threaten you from without. The channel closed. The Vorish fleet jumped to hyperspace. And throughout the coalition fleet, 11 different species began to truly understand what it meant that humanity had finally decided to end its isolation. They had asked for salvation. What they received was something far more terrifying, a glimpse of what happened when humanity decided you were a problem that needed solving. The war was over before it began. And across the galaxy, species that had never even heard of humanity began learning a new lesson: victory wasn't always measured in ships destroyed or planets conquered. Sometimes, it was measured in empires that simply folded.